Welcome back. My name is Ashley, and this is the Black Sheep Christian Podcast, where we try to define the definition of what it means to be a Christian. I'm Sister Ashley. Today, Dr. Kimya Nuru Dennis is a different approach to diversity training. Join us for a unique and authentic 365 diversity experience, because Dr. Dennis is an experienced educator who will leave you with an understanding of how to make change in your own life as well as in the world. Can I just say I'm so impressed with your resume? When I was just looking at your profile, I was like, oh my goodness, oh my God. Like, I'm just so impressed with what you've accomplished already. And the resources, the knowledge, your 365 diversity website, the services that you're offering. I mean, I was just like, I'm just so blown away. So I just want to say I am just so honored because I feel
Thank you. I want more people to be figuratively blown away by my services. That's why one of my mottos is not your typical diversity training, because I am trained based on centuries of African Black knowledge, activism, scholarship. And it's not based on these acronyms like DEI and anti-racism, like this new stuff, like white people's bestseller books. This work has been done long before any of this new stuff has existed, where I give intro lessons, because again, I was a full-time professor as well, so I know how to do intros, but I don't allow, as it pertains to race, I don't allow white people to pretend to constantly need an intro lesson, which is intentional. It's not accidental. It's an intentional distraction, because white people, as an aggregate, with some exceptions, really are taught that they can pretend to be clueless and waste our time. So we spend the rest of our lives giving white people a definition of racism. And especially they want us to use a dictionary definition that doesn't challenge them to really think critically and consciously. And literally, you'll spend the rest of your life doing that. And a lot of people understand the problem with that when I'm talking about gender justice. Like, if you spend the rest of your life explaining to men, for example, the problem with domestic violence and stuff like that, people would be like, that's jacked up. He knows what's up. People would understand when I'm talking about sexuality, when we're talking about LGBTQIA rights, including Black LGBTQIA. We understand, don't you dare spend your whole life explaining to heterosexuals, to cisgender people, the problem with certain policies and laws and violence towards LGBTQIA people. People understand it when we're talking about wealth, right? Wealthy people are a small percentage of the United States of America, small percentage of Canada, small percentage of Western Hemisphere in the world, but they own everything. That's not right. But it's when we're talking about race, and particularly white people for 5 centuries, that all of a sudden white people get outraged and too many Black and brown people become token sellouts. That now you got to start crying with white people. You got to start using a baby voice. You don't use a baby voice when talking about the problems with capitalism.
No.
Like, you don't see, like, even if you're not into socialism, communism, or anything else, critiquing every economic system is important for rights and freedom and justice. And you don't see people talking about, we need workers' rights, please, baby, please.
Well, I think January 6th was like a prime example, you know? Yes. Even some, I remember a white coworker, she was like, looking at the security, she was like, they look like traffic cops. Like it was seen. Everybody knew what was happening. And January 6th, I think, is a prime example of what you're talking about. It's like, if we were there, which we did, we were there not too long ago, Black Lives Matter, we were peacefully protesting. And for example, Donald Trump, protesters were gassed in order to be moved away for his photo op. Here we are trying to educate. Here we are putting T-shirt signs, John Lewis standing before he passes away. And we haven't gotten anywhere with legislation.
We're not going to.
January 6th, they were violent. they broke and entered illegally in a building, a federal building, and yet there are laws about voting.
Yes. So hopefully you'll include some of this in the podcast that you release to the public, because it's important to keep these discussions going, because Indigenous people and Black people have had these discussions for centuries, right? A lot of people, and I write on medium.com, so you can see my most recent piece where I address this. A lot of people are pretending that they just woke up in 2016, and they especially just woke up in 2020 because of COVID and the most recent Black Lives Matter protests. And now they're talking about critical race theory. That theory, Black folks created that theory. You know, Black activists, Black scholars, Black faculty created that theory in the 1980s. So I keep telling people, don't ever base your knowledge and your spoken word of your knowledge on white liberal permission, white progressive permission, white anti-fascist permission. If you were silently supporting critical race theory because you didn't want white people to be mad, but now you're speaking up because, oh, now white people fighting about it, that's also bad. You still giving white people power. Like my presence, my work is not based on white permission. And people will say, but who's hiring you and paying you? Yes, that's the case when you talk about any kind of work, including when I am a professor. But that never should translate to your whole entire existence, your whole entire voice only being based on what white people want to hear. The same thing when I'm talking about gender justice. The same thing when I'm talking about sexuality. The same thing when I'm talking about disability services. It can't be people who are able health giving me permission to speak about my own disability. Because we're trying to get rid of that power disparity. Getting rid of power disparity is not based on the people in power giving you permission to get rid of their power. They're never going to give you that permission. Legislators are never going to do the work they have to do. Political parties are all horrible. Black folk need to stop aligning with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Black politicians are the same horrible. They're just happy with the Black smile. Their challenges to white people are based on white liberal version of challenges. White liberals don't mind us speaking up. And I tell this to Black faculty all the time, especially new Black faculty. A lot of times new Black faculty will get excited because they're like, yeah, this school, the white faculty are happy about my activism. I always warn them, they're white liberal, white progressive version of happy. They will let you know when they have a problem with it. And the problem will usually come because their the white donors for the school speak out, their white board of trustees speak out. And if you start to criticize white liberals, that's when they'll speak out as well too. So I tell people, don't let white people think that you need their permission. You might need their support or want the support. They also need to know at all times, 24/7, 365, hence 365 diversity, that my work is going to continue. My people have done this work for centuries. White people, even white abolitionists working to abolish slavery, still had white power, right? So the white abolitionists were not our saviors either, because the moment they changed their mind, they could have snitched on us. So our people, we've always been on our own. So I don't believe in a such thing as ally. So I tell white people, the white people who collaborate with me, including my white friends and white colleagues, they know that it's not this whole ally. It's a collaboration. It's honesty. Just like when I collaborate with people who are LGBTQIA, I'm cisgender heterosexual. It's not an apologetic voice that they use with me. It's a very stern and challenging voice. They let me know at all times, as a cisgender heterosexual person, I too am guilty of cisgenderism, heterocentrism, homophobia, in the sense that there's things that I myself have tolerated and allowed throughout my life. Therefore, I got to hold myself accountable too, while holding other cisgender heterosexual people accountable. I'm not an ally. I'm a contributor, collaborator, advocate, and an activist. And that's what needs to happen when we're talking about dismantling power. It can never be the minoritized people begging, being like, oh God, we're just so happy you're here. Please don't walk away. Like when I go to events, including LGBTQIA events, I'm cisgender heterosexual. Sometimes don't nobody even recognize that I'm there. They don't acknowledge me. They don't thank me. I'm there. So if you're one of those people who need to be acknowledged and you need someone to tell you where the restroom is and stupid stuff like that to make you feel welcomed, you're not an advocate. You're not a collaborator. It's still all about you. And for power majorities, it does not have to be about power majorities. It doesn't mean you're being mean to people. It doesn't mean you're being hateful. It means that you're holding people accountable so they understand that dismantling injustices is not based on making the power majorities happy.
It sounds like checks and balances.
Well, you know, when people say that, yes. If people say it in the government sense, of course, the government don't have no checks and balances.
No,
right?
No. It's an idea. It's an image. Yeah, it's an idea.
That's an image, right? Like the legislative and
right.
There's really no checks and balances. That's what they keep teaching us in intro to Constitution, and even if you go to like jurisprudence courses in law school and pre-law and criminal justice programs, they'll say checks and balances. They'll also say things like, you know, separating religion from the government, which doesn't really exist either.
No, that doesn't.
There's no such thing as objectivity. Everyone brings their own assumptions, biases, and expectations to the table with everything they do. So the checks and balances has to be an honest discussion of none of us are robots. We all have assumptions. We all have personal expectations. But the whole checks and balances still has that power in it because we know whose opinions have always mattered.
Right. It kind of almost answers my next question, which is the church, you know, especially with Black Lives Matter in the church. Because I remember I said to someone, I said, this doesn't feel right. I said, where is the church? Now, I remember seeing Joel Osteen walk or a picture of him walking.
We don't need protesters. We don't need all that money he makes, and he's being critiqued as well as being perhaps a scammer. So we don't need him to walk. He can go home.
I think I remember seeing a snippet of TD Jakes, but that's really about it. It wasn't even like, because I think he talked to Gail. I could be wrong. I think he talked to Gail in an interview. But it just wasn't, it was just like a blurb and it just like went away. Like I can't even remember where TD Jakes did an interview or what he even talked about. It was just kind of like a blurb and it just kind of like blue, blue, blue. It just went away. It just wasn't any significant power, you know, because when we talk about Bible and scripture and Jesus, you know, he's like, you know, include everyone. After Jesus left, you know, God told one of the Romans, one of the Romans. What am I talking about? I think it was Peter. Hey, I need for you to go and talk to this Roman. Peter's like, what? No. You know, and God's like, they're my people too. But where am I going with this? I just lost my thought.
I got you. No, I got you. I'll help you with the thought.
I just lost my thought.
So there are some religious leaders who have been at the forefront, such as Reverend Barber, who is based in North Carolina, but he's represented across the nation and around the world. A lot of people hear Reverend Barber's voice. You can see him on like MSNBC, for example. There are some leaders such as Nation of Islam leaders. So here's the thing. We do want to acknowledge the role of religion, specifically Christianity and Islam, the role in Black cultures. And this is not only in America, but also Canada and the South America's Caribbean. But we also want to remember the origins of thousands of years of religions before there was a such thing as white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism, before there was Catholicism, the original Christianities, right?
Right.
Unfortunately, most African Black people in parts of the world have no idea of the origins of the faiths that they follow. They literally are going based on white people's version, which is, of course, where the white Jesus and the white God with the beard comes in. And they go based on the King James Version. King James Version, different versions, been thrown around, different scriptures, lost under the sea somewhere. And you know me, you and I've talked about this before. I'm not a Christian. I'm a Jesus follower. And it's so wild how some people don't understand the concept of following a spirituality and faith out following an organized religion. That's why when we talk about the sociology of religion, there are sociologists such as myself, when we talk about it, all religions for thousands of years started off as cult collectives. And when we say cult, it doesn't have to be Jim Jones with Kool-Aid, right? Cult means that you have a group of people. It could be 4 people, but it's a collective of people who just believe it because they believe it, and they're very dedicated to it. When we talk about the versions of Christianity and Islam and Judaism that are the most prevalent around the world, I always tell people these religions became the most prevalent for a reason, not because they were running around smiling at people and showing love, but because they were starting wars, murdering people, raping people, stealing knowledge, stealing information, stealing artifacts, stealing sciences, all that stuff. Therefore, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, I want everyone to remember the origins of Black movements, 401 years of origins, which connects to spiritualities that don't necessarily include Christianity. Because remember, when we were first forced to come to the Western Hemisphere, those of us on the Western part of the African continent who were Christian usually were not white people's version. So even if they were Christian, they came here, they were thrown a different kind of Christianity.
Whoa. My brain just like exploded. Wait a minute. My brain just exploded. So they were already Christians when they were captured?
So here's the thing about the Western component of the continent of Africa, right? That's different nations, different cultures, different languages, and different religions and spiritualities.
Right.
So there could have been people from that side of Africa who were Christian. It just would have been the original version of Christianity and not white people's version. Because remember, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant version was furthered around the world, partly due to transatlantic slavery and missionary.
Wow. My mind is just like...
So like Jesus himself was not a Christian, right? Christianity, on one side, Christianity was started because of Jesus, but Jesus, of course, was Jewish, right?
Yes.
Not a white Jew. He was more so Middle Eastern, perhaps Asian diaspora Jew, based on the categories that we've used in the past 5 centuries that were created by white people, by the way. So we always want people to understand the origins of religions such as Christianity, because that really ties into what we expect these religious groups to do when we have social justice movements like Black Lives Matter, which is beyond that particular, of course, organization created by a group of wonderful Black women. We want to understand that if we want religious leaders present, we don't want them to be present in the point of controlling the narrative and controlling the space. Because for me, as a non-religious person, as a non-Christian Jesus follower, the reason why I'm not religious is because I think that these versions of religion have already been used to terrorize and oppress.
Yes, that I do. Yes.
You know?
Yes.
So we have thousands of years of thousands upon thousands, if not even millions, of religions and spiritualities. Thankfully, some of these Asian, indigenous, African spiritualities and religions still exist around the world. Some of them have been connected to other religions like Islam and Christianity. Like there's also like Black Judaism, African Judaism that incorporates other forms of spiritualities and meditations and faith-based. But we just want to understand, in looking at that, we want to make sure we're challenging the power of that. Like we can't say our lives matter, our safety matters, our health matters, and then we allow power majority, in this case, religious people of certain religion, to come over and be in charge, to be the voice, to be the spokes. I'm not going to let no Christians come up in here and tell me now, in terms of morality, sin, I so don't care what they think about regarding morality and sin. They will force you to think about it because they will come up into these spaces. So I tell people, you have to understand what freedom really means. For me, freedom is literally, I'm not going to be controlled by white people. I'm not going to be controlled by religious people of any religion. I'm not going to be controlled by men. The list goes on. I'm not going to be controlled based on health. And so I want people, when we talk about our lives mattering, my life matters includes religious people cannot come into these protests or marches or movements and now say my voice matters the most because I am a pastor. Right?
Wow. I got some deep thought. Now I'm going to switch gears here.
You're funny.
I'm learning some new things. This is what I started this podcast for, because not only to get close to God and have a relationship, but to learn beyond the church walls. You know, yes. I always in my spirit felt like there was information that I just needed to grasp, and I just couldn't. I could feel it, but I just couldn't find it. But I'm switching gears.
Because they don't want you to.
Yeah. Can't argue with that. There was a video when I was looking at your profile and your research. There's a video that I found called Child Free. For the past couple of weeks, you know, I've been talking to other people about LGBTQ. And so the main argument against LGBTQ is they can't procreate, like as if they can just one day become straight, which I'm having a hard time trying to grasp that concept. But anyways, so I saw your child-free video, and all of a sudden it hit me. I just had this thought, and I said to myself, well, that's a lame argument, because I've noticed in my generation, there are more straight people who have said, I'm not going to have children for various reasons. And I remember Miley Cyrus years ago said, I'm not going to have children because I think it was like climate change or something like that. She had a reason. But there are straight people who are saying, I'm not going to have children because of financial reasons, or I just don't want them. So it's now they can procreate, but you know, they can have children, but they decide not to have children. When it comes to, here's my question, when it comes to LGBTQ in scripture, what is your statement about this argument about being gay? It's a sin. It's against God. What knowledge do you have about that?
Anyone who knows me knows that I do not believe that religious documents are literal documents. I believe that they are figurative in language, and they are written by people who tried to make sense of their environment. And that's what they wrote based on their opinion. I don't think it has anything to do with a higher power or fact. So I'm going to go ahead and say that. A lot of Christians, especially traditional conservative Christians, will be mad because they have been taught to pick and choose scriptures and force their scriptures on the rest of us. That's what they've been taught since childhood, and I don't allow that in my spaces. So there's nothing in the Bible about sexual identity and sexuality and sexual orientation. Sorry to break it to you, Christians. There's nothing in there about that. And so people who use the Bible are also the same people who believe that Adam and Eve really happened. Like, they really believe that it was just the biological male on this earth. The biological male got bored, and God said, let me bestow a female upon thee. By the way, let me get her from the rib. And then the female sees a pomegranate or an apple in the tree. The snake comes and takes over the world. Dun, dun, dun. There's really grown folk and children who believe that, and I can't stop them. But don't try to put that into laws, policies, procedures, or anything. Y'all can believe that on your own, right? So with that said, people are going to keep believing what they believe. They're going to keep believing that they own morality. They're going to keep believing that there's a such thing as sin. They're going to keep pretending that LGBTQIA is a sin, despite the fact that thousands of years, including during the days of Jesus living, there were different gender identities, non-identities, sexualities, asexualities. All this has always existed. These are also usually the same people who are mad when you say Jesus drank. Guess what? The water was dirty. Jesus was drinking wine all day, every day. All day, every day. There was nothing to drink. He woke up. Poppy had some wine. Okay. Go ahead, y'all. It's okay. Okay.
There are people who say that they don't drink and it's for religious, and I never could understand that. I was like, oh, okay.
You know, and again, there's thousands of years of trillions of people, many different faiths, religions. So I don't slam people for that. The problem is when they confuse faith, which is the, hope in things unseen, unknown, and just, having that spirituality. When they confuse that for fact, that's when the problem comes, because they want to force that fact on us. It's not a sin to be gay. It's not a sin to be bisexual. It's not a sin to be asexual. It's not a sin to not know either way. We call it pronatalism, when people will say you have to have children. You have to, by the time you're born, now for the girls, biological females, girls, you got to give them a little baby so they can grow up now having a little fake baby, drinking from their breast, pretending to change diapers. That's the brainwashing. For boys, what we call doing gender in sociology is that process where biological males are taught, people decide that they're boys, therefore you're going to teach them to play with construction trucks when they're children, right?
Right.
Me, I have family where it's mostly men, all Black men. So I have 3 brothers and my dad. And so I was playing with the boys. They'd be like, what you doing? My Barbie gonna fight all these G.I. Joes. My Barbie was whipping up on them. I was my brother's first exposure to gender justice. You want to come at me? I'm gonna show you the Bruce Lee movies we watch every weekend. The Chinese versus Japanese movie. If y'all never seen it, you better Google it. We watch these movies, and I showed my brother when we was little that don't ever assume what I like, what I can do, because you're like, oh, she's a girl.
Right.
So the same thing happens when we're talking about LGBTQIA, where we're talking about heterosexuality. By the way, I don't say straight. Why? Because I feel like if we're talking about men and women, if that's different gender identities, to me, that seems crooked. To me, straight is men and men, women and women. That's just me. To me, that just seems more straight. So whenever people say straight, I'm just always think it's funny. I'm like, why is that considered straight though? But so that connects.
That. I never even questioned that.
Yeah, people ask that.
Like it makes sense. Like now that I think about it, that you said that, it's like it makes sense. It's like straight is like right, it's perfect, but they're not straight. That means that there's some type of flaw and imperfection, right?
I mean, that's the thing, like terminology is always, so for example, the term homosexual or homosexuality, when we look at the origins and how that term was translated into eventually, unfortunately, a homophobic slur, I don't use that term anymore. However, there are people, including an LGBTQIA community, who use the term quote unquote homosexual or homosexuality. But that's the difference between within your group using a term and someone from the outside using that term. Right? So that's why I always tell people, when people within a particular underserved group tell me not to say something, never would I say, but you say it. Right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, right.
Never, ever do that to people within an underserved identity, because they can say what they want amongst each other. Just like we use certain racial slurs within our community as Black folk, and white people and non-Black people can't come in and say, well, what if I said it? I mean, we handle you a certain way to cook out, but that's different than when so-and-so says it. So it's similar when we talk about child-free life, because what we want people to understand is, since our childhood, we call that the life script, where people are like, you're born now, which means one day you're going to have a baby. Like, you got little children, not only thinking about having children eventually one day, but thinking about, maybe I got to get married in cultures that value marriage, which Black culture does, despite what people keep pretending for generations. I don't believe in marriage, but everybody have freedom. And so that also ties to sexuality, because people are assumed to be heterosexual, which is a false assumption as well. Some people believe that all forms of sexual identity and gender identity are learned So if you teach someone that they're heterosexual all their life, which includes basic language, like in elementary schools when people are playing, sandboxes still exist. Like back in the day, we used to play on sandboxes. I don't know what we were doing, but I guess adults told us we had to play in the sandbox. It's stupid now, but we were, but it was all based on that whole girls had to play with girls, boys had to play with boys. And I tell people, when you think about it that way, when you think about what it means for a good percentage of your life, often K through 12, to be told that you got to only play with someone within your same gender identity, why is it so baffling to people when people have a sexual attraction or any other kind of attraction to someone within their gender identity? Like you've literally told them since birth that you're only going to have a friend who identifies the same as you. Boys have been told that they can smack each other's butts on the soccer field, basketball court, football field. I used to work with young Black men football players. I tutored them for 6 years. And I would explain that's what we talk about in terms of situational sexuality, situational gender. Like Black men, for example, are told to act hardcore. Don't you dare smack each other's butts when you leave in the liquor store. However, when I see you on the basketball court tomorrow, I'm going to smack that ass. You know what I'm saying? That's the situational masculinity, right? I can't smack your ass until you got the good liquor. You got the good liquor, smack. But when you get that 3-point shot tomorrow, there you go, smack that ass.
Right.
And I apologize for my language to your traditional conservative audience, but I use language, real life language that you all probably use, but you pretend you don't. Okay. But so we call that situational masculinity. And so it's the same thing when we're talking about having babies. Those of us who are child-free, I'm not having biological or adopted children. Why? Because I don't want, people have stopped asking me this because I'll be 44 next month. But when I first started the research in 2013, I conducted the first known study only with African Black people who are child-free, mostly cisgender women. And I also created and taught the first course about child-free people. And so I created a collective of people who were happy because African Black culture is often very pronatalist, including on the continent of Africa. It's like, no matter where you are around the world, it's that Adam and Eve thing again. There are people who literally believe, and billions of people who believe, that females, girls, and women were only created to reproduce. So that's also where religion comes in, because even people who are not religious still tend to come from cultures that are very religious in that sense and very traditional. So a lot of Black people are atheist and agnostic now, but they still remember what their religious family taught them, right? So that's how this really ties up to our communities and cultures, because there are people who will express anger. So some child-free Black women have been told things like, and not only Black women, but they've been told, well, I hope you get raped, like that kind of thing.
Oh, wow.
Based on this notion that we're going to make you have a baby. And that's one thing, like those of us who are infertile and happily infertile, we can't have babies anyway. We always tell people this assumption that that somehow you can force it into us. First of all, there's billions of people around the world who are infertile, and not all of them want babies. And that's always been the case, right? Infertility is not a sin either, but there are people who believe in religions that say infertility is created by the devil, something like that, or a ghost haunting your uterus, that kind of thing.
Right.
So when I started doing this research, it really tackles a lot. It tackles not only deciding never to have children, but also tackling what the expectation is for heterosexual people, and increasingly the expectation is for people who are involved in same-sex and same-gender relationships. Because now people say, well, if you're going to be married, if our state is going to acknowledge your marriage, you have to find a way to get pregnant. It's this whole idea that you have to follow the life script for us to consider you not just normal, but also moral, and also fitting our religious ideas.
Right.
So that all goes together. And I tell people, we're not stopping them from believing what they believe. It's when they forcing it on everyone else through their laws. And unfortunately, most medical and health professionals are taught through undergrad, graduate programs, medical schools, and career trainings. They're taught very pronatalist policies and practices.
Mm.
So those of us who have good OBGYNs and good doctors who believe in a such thing as sterilization by choice, like a tubal ligation by choice, or birth controls, including permanent birth controls, we always want people around the world to have access to those same kinds of doctors.
Right.
Whereas most people don't. Like most medical doctors are more likely to do a vasectomy for men without asking, does your wife know this? For women, oftentimes, the women oftentimes will need written permission from a husband or someone.
Right.
Yeah, so all of these tie together, and it ties into spirituality, religion, people's definition of adulthood. It also ties into, yes, some people might get sterilized by choice and then change their mind, but that's life. Just like there's thousands of years of trillions of people having babies. Guess where a lot of those babies unfortunately end up? In adoption facilities, abandoned on streets, unfortunately murdered, tortured. Having a baby does not mean you want a baby. It means that you are fertile and you reproduced.
Right.
So we want people to understand that telling people to have children does not mean that children are automatically wanted and treated well.
Well said. I have one more question for you today.
Uh-oh.
And what you talked about, and that is men. I feel like this is like the final frontier. You know, women have their movement with, with the feminist movement, which we're still grappling with and we're still trying to figure out. But, women are able to do generally things that they haven't been able to do in past years. But it seems as if the male identity is like the final frontier. And it seems as if there's this struggle of how a man should be identified, especially within the church. It should be the strong provider, for his family. Yeah. So what are your views on this struggle of the male identity? And I say that because it's a question, because Jesus wasn't this strong man with a gun. He wasn't like this, because as typical white Christians are these guys who are Bible, they're God believing, they Second Amendment right. But Jesus wouldn't, I imagine, would never have owned a gun. But oh, you think he could have?
So here's the thing. Peace comes in different forms.
Oh, okay.
Like I always say, I really think that Jesus might have always had a flask with some liquor in it or some wine or something because they couldn't drink water. Like I always joke about that. A lot of people don't think Jesus was married. There might be evidence that Jesus was married. They've, had that evidence presented for generations. I mean, Jesus was a carpenter. Jesus danced. I've got, images of someone pretending to be Jesus pop locking, breakdancing. That's always fun. I would not be shocked if Jesus had to whoop up on somebody every once in a while.
Okay.
Throughout his life.
Okay.
Jesus was born a baby. A lot of people just think of the image of Jesus as a grown man with a beard and long hair. Talking about, in the name of the Lord, I'm here to save thee from eternal sin and damnation. Jesus might have been the one on the schoolyard talking about, you disrespectful, you mad disrespectful. So that's the thing about it, right? I think that, and we don't know either way, right?
Right.
100 years from now, somebody might, the old writing from Jesus in which he was cussing out everybody in his native language. We don't know. So that's the thing about just expanding it kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. We were talking about morality and the definition of sin and everything. I think that people need to stop thumping the Bible, stop throwing around the Quran and the Torah, and stop acting like there's just one way to be. When I do presentations, even when I teach college courses, I always explain that most people, including grown folk, don't really know themselves. They know nothing about their own personality. So when I teach, the first thing I usually do for students is I ask students, and my students, when I was full-time professor in North Carolina, they ranged in age from 18 to 65 years old. I would say, think about, who are you? And tell me who you are. I don't want to hear what your mama said. I don't want to hear what your grandma told you. Who are you? And a lot of people, including our people, Black folk, are real quiet because they really are just accustomed to being taught to regurgitate what they're told. They regurgitate written biblical, Quran, Torah. They regurgitate scriptures. They regurgitate what their K through 12 teachers told them. I so don't care about that because them K through 12 teachers weren't talking about anything usually. They're just told to regurgitate what they read in the textbook. Like, it's cultures of regurgitation.
Right.
Don't think about yourself. We can talk about this in terms of Black cultures, where a lot of Black folk are taught to be surrounded by family constantly, and Black girls and Black women to take care of your family constantly. Like, if you're by yourself, you're selfish. The only time you should be by yourself is if you are on the toilet. And even then, make sure your family know they can get you if they need you. Right?
Right.
So we think about this in terms of most adults really not knowing themselves, which contributes, unfortunately, to mental illness, contributes to substance use, alcoholism, because it's that eternal internal struggle. Think about this as it pertains to boys and men. So when I do presentations, part of my research is with Black men. So I do presentations about, I call it Boys to Men. Shout out to the group Boys to Men.
Yes.
So we're talking about notions of masculinity for men, how that ties to mental illness, how it ties to suicidal thoughts, suicidal behaviors, and how it ties to police.
Yes.
I do not support police, by the way. And no matter how much you train police, they're going to still do what they do. That includes Black cops. And so when we're talking about that masculinity, what it means to define manhood, I tell people, instead focus on how you define your own personality. I mean, we all learn behaviors. So there's some things that we do and we don't know how we learned how to do it. So no longer doing it is very difficult because you got to be like, okay, I got to get this out my brain because I've been taught this since childhood.
Right.
Like, I've been taught since childhood that to be a man, it means you now got to have a deep voice. Not quite like Barry White, you know, but some deep, if you got a deep voice, you're not no man. What's wrong with you? You know, and that ties to sexuality regarding the scrotum and the penis and all that stuff. Testicles, all that stuff. Like, most people are not taught about their bodies even. No. You know, they're not taught.
Yeah, it's a no. Ooh.
Yeah, so they're not taught that for thousands of years. There have always been people who are born without genitalia, with multiple genitalia, different sizes of genitalia, all that stuff. So to go back to your question, what really needs to be done, though, is what some organizations and some people like myself are doing, which is having these discussions with boys and men, which can include people who do not gender identify, but they might identify as masculine in a sense without having a gender identity within that, to explain that we don't want you to be stuck in what your family always told you have to be. If you prefer playing the piano and not throwing a football, then that's learning yourself. So grasp that. Also, thinking about things like aggression. A lot of times masculinity is connected to aggression. So it doesn't mean you're fighting someone else. You might be harming yourself in an aggressive way. So those are the kinds of understandings that have to happen. Those will always be difficult because particularly in African cultures and Black families in most parts of the world, they really stick to traditional, very outdated ideas of boyhood and manhood and masculinity. It's based on this falseness of testosterone. I tell people, you don't know your hormones. Like, literally, even when you're born, when they give you a gender assignment, first they usually will start with assigning you a biological sex, male, female. If they give you a gender assignment, it's based on what they see regarding your gender, your genitalia. They don't tell you your hormones like throughout your life, unless you're going to hormonal therapy or, you know, you're getting hormonal injections. Could be gender transformation or fertility. but you tend not to know your testosterone, estrogen, and any of that stuff.
Mm.
So boys and men, when they're told about being a boy and a man and masculinity and manhood, it's not based on facts.
Mm.
It's 100% based on the culture and what they've learned. And so that's why I always show people images. Like when I teach about gender, there's an image it's from a website called The Art of Manliness. And they'll show images throughout centuries of men wearing lace, men holding each other's hands, men sitting on each other's laps, including Black men.
Mm.
And of course, the common response is, well, they must be gay. Actually, no. Because when you see girls and women hugging, feeling each other's hair, you don't assume that they're lesbians typically.
No. It's more like
yeah, people might see us cuddling on a bed together and they be like, oh, they must be cold outside, right? They don't assume our sexuality necessarily. Now, they might try to for a different sexual reason, but they tend not to assume that. So the same thing applies for boys and men. And this is thousands of years of looking at different levels of emotions and affections. And so I think that's what really needs to happen. And thankfully, there are spaces that are doing it. I'm forgetting his name now that I bring him up, but he's a Black man rapper. Is he in Philadelphia? But he made a song. He released it a few months ago called Understanding Your Feelings and Knowing When to Smile. So it was shared all over Black Twitter about a month ago. In the video, he starts off by showing a Black man and a Black boy, and they're in a martial arts class. And the Black boy was trying to fight back tears, and the Black man puts his arm around him and says, cry. It's okay to cry. Seeing that make Black folks, like Black Twitter was like crying, because that's very rare. You usually will see Black boys and Black men being told, don't be a punk.
Right.
And people will use religion as an excuse for that ignorance response as well. So I think it just needs to be that open discussion. But this is where girls and women come into it as well, because girls and women have been guilty of holding on to those gendered assumptions, gendered stereotypes, views of sexuality as well, right? Whenever we talk about inequities, it requires everyone's collaboration for the nonsense to perpetuate for thousands of years, right? So girls and women need to stop saying stupid things like, you're a crybaby. Need to stop saying stupid things like you're a tomboy. When girls like to climb trees, that don't make them a tomboy. It makes them a girl who likes to climb a daggone tree. Like, I've had to tell women to stop saying that you're not a tomboy, right? Like, stop saying things like I'm menstruating, therefore I'm going to be a real bitch this week. Like, all that stupid stuff. Like, and these are people who believe in gender justice, but they'll say stupid stuff. And I'm like, you're perpetuating stupidity. Stop it. So the same thing applies when we're talking about understanding boys and men and supporting boys and men. Girls and women you don't have to coddle and baby men. Like, you don't have to be like, let me breastfeed you the rest of your life to support you. But you also need to stop being stern and pretend that, if you're not a fully employed man making money, supporting his household, you are a loser. That's not true either. I don't believe that males and men and boys were created I don't believe in a such thing as men have had a household. Like, all that stuff, that's 100% false. And it also contributes to the ownership of land. And that's also the foundation of the institution of marriage. I want people to get rid of all that. I know they're not going to. They're not going to. But I just want people to understand how you can't complain about the inequities and injustices, and then you go home and you convey men are head of household. Like, literally, the whole men of head of household thing is part of the foundation of men being paid more in workplaces. It's all the foundation. It's all based on patriarchy. And I mean, we have thousands of years of different cultures, some patriarchal, some matriarchal, some of gender non-identities. You don't have to be patriarchal. You don't have to believe in men dominance. You don't have to believe in HNIC, which I'm not going to say out loud. Y'all watch that movie. Don't make us take black cards. Come on, y'all. You don't have to believe that stuff. If you insist on believing it because you think that's Christianity or something, that's on you. I don't believe that Jesus said anything about men of head of households. I don't believe, just like white people use Jesus as an excuse for transatlantic slavery. White people found one scripture about ownership of humans.
Yes, yes.
And they tried to use it for defense of transatlantic slavery and forcing white Anglo-Saxon Protestantism,
Yes.
which is not the original Christianity, on cultures of people from West Africa, right?
Right.
So I tell people, you can't have it both ways. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect, but you got to acknowledge your bullshit.
Right.
Like, acknowledge your imperfections, acknowledge your bullshit, acknowledge your hypocrisy. That's the only way that you can truly work towards justice. Pretending that you're clueless because you like the way life is until something smacks you in the face, then you want to march down streets. That's not how this goes. I don't like situational outrage. I don't like convenient outrage. Like white people marching in Black Lives Matter protests during COVID, beginning of COVID, when a lot of white people were not going to work and school. That was convenient outrage. You know, white people fighting the po-po back then, a year ago, that was convenient outrage. When Black folk were celebrating that last year, I told Black folks, y'all are so daggone gullible. Y'all are so easily impressed because you're desperate to be liked and loved by white people. How about you let white people break many sweats? Be thankless, like don't have to thank white people. How about you let white people work hard for that which white people created? White people created racial categories. White people created white power. White people created white supremacy, 5 centuries. White people do not need your applause when they start to be marching down streets.
Moving forward, like we're not aware, but we're aware. Because I use the word tomboy. You know, I described myself as a tomboy when I was a kid. Like, yeah, I was a tomboy. You know, I liked wearing t-shirts and put my hair back and you know, and I use that on my daughter because, you know, she liked climbing on my grandparents' tree, you know, but I didn't, I guess I didn't know what that word was doing. Like I knew, but I didn't know. Moving forward, what can someone do to change? What can I do to change in order to be better, to respect others who are not me or who are different from me?
Yeah, we just have to watch our language, and this is for all of us. So when we talk about, and by the way, you said feminism. So remember that gender equity, that's feminism was created by white women for white women. Same thing with women's suffrage, women's liberation. It's all 100% about white women. They left out Black and brown women, Indigenous, Black, Asian, non-white, Hispanic, non-white, Latinx.
And we approached them about it. We approached them.
I really like Gloria Steinem. And she understands to this day what we're talking about. I am a staunch Black feminist, and I challenge cisgender heterosexual Black men to understand that my Pan-African pro-Blackness never requires being submissive, ever. However, we have to remember the origins of gender equity and not ever give white women credit for being the first to speak on this, because I was interviewed for Race to Dinner, and you can find where I say about white women that white women are contributors to 5 centuries of white supremacy. So white women pretend to be gender oppressed, sexuality oppressed, and they are in that sense of those underserved identities. However, they are active contributors to 5 centuries of white dominance and white supremacy. So when you ask, how do we challenge ourselves? It's again, first you have to be honest. You got to be honest about how you're contributing, even if covertly, to inequities. You're contributing even in your silence. There are many things that people observe and they don't speak out. Like I tell Black folk this all the time. It is easy for you to speak out against white oppression when it's in the news. But when your butt is in class, at school, at work, every day, you sit there and you smile at white people and you say you're doing that to keep your job and to get a raise. When Black people at your job or at school speak out against white dominance, you will laugh at that Black person. You oftentimes will help white people hurt that Black person in some way. And I've seen it even in academia happen. For example, me, I'm an outspoken Black person. Why? Because although I specialize in theory, I don't live my life based on theory. I live my life based on real life stuff. If I'm going to complain about something, I'm not complaining conceptually. I'm complaining because I'm going to tell you exactly what the issue is. So you can never complain about me never speaking out. I'm going to speak out. That's just how I do. Been like that all my life. So I tell people, you want to change some things, look at how you contribute to the problem. I've been on committees, board of directors with Black folk who sat there quietly while white people ran their mouths, while white people came at me. And I literally was by myself, even though there was other Black folks in the room. So we need to watch our language. We need to stop being behind the scenes supporters. I've had to tell Black folk, brown folk, and white liberals, don't you ever thank me after the fact. If you sat there silently while white people acted a fool in response to me, and then you want to send me a text, thank you for speaking out, or take me to lunch next week, I'm going to say no. I'm going to delete you from my contact list. I don't need silent supporters. Because that's the same thing for centuries that has happened to our people. We're being lynched from trees, literally. And, you know, maybe a Black person will come and wipe the sweat off our face. You ain't stopping these white people from lynching me, but you worried about the sweat from my face? Okay. You know, you can see that in the movie 12 Years a Slave. I hate that movie. But there's a scene where she's being slashed in the back. And they are wiping. They're like, it's gonna be over soon. It's gonna be over soon. We don't need your positive affirmation.
At least you're braver than me. I couldn't click on it. I just couldn't click on it. I was like, I was like, I don't have the mental space for this movie.
I mean, it's based on a real life story. Here's the thing. In real life, yes, this Black man was hanging out with white people further up north, getting drunk with them. And this is where I hold our people accountable. If your people are being harmed in one space, there's nothing stopping your people from being harmed everywhere. So that goes back to the token Negro thing. Don't you ever celebrate when your people are being oppressed, because oppression is not just individual level, right?
Right.
If my people are being harmed in school systems, if my people are being harmed by medical professionals, including during COVID-19, when medical professionals pretend to be heroes, whenever my people are being harmed, I'm being harmed. So just because I have friends who are white and we hang out, these friends understand that I do not detach myself. So same thing, 12 Years a Slave. He was dumb. You know, of course, white people are still to blame for enslaving him, but he was dumb getting drunk with white people. Slavery is happening and you're hanging out. Right. And that happened a lot for Black people who were not enslaved back then, right? It's similar to what people talk about now with successful Black people who forget that our people are struggling elsewhere. So yeah, I hope people listening to this understand how all this connects, though, because when we're talking about whether it's manhood, whether it's changing our language, we don't want to be paranoid so that we can't live life and be happy and successful, but we also want to understand that we need to do our best to catch ourselves, you know, challenge our wording. We might say something and be like, I could have done without saying that, or I could have said that better, because sometimes we say something that's harming people who are being abused.
Right.
There's terminology that I hear a lot of times in Black communities that's very anti-gay and anti-transgender. And a lot of times Black folk are just talking like they always heard grandma and them talk, right? And that's when I say we're not ants in an anthill. We literally have our own agency. White liberals and white conservatives both think that Black folk are stupid. Despite us coming from thousands of years of knowledge and centuries of knowledge in the Western Hemisphere, white liberals and white conservatives think that they need to save us from ourselves because we're dumb somehow, right?
Right.
And I say, stop reinforcing that falsehood by pretending that Black folk don't have any consciousness, knowledge, agency, and actions and choices. We do, which is why we should not trust politicians. We should not wait for politicians, which is why it don't matter who's in the White House. They all are going to be anti-Black and harm us. Harming us with a smile is still harming us, right? Just like you see those photos and postcards of white people eating watermelon while we're lynching from trees. That's the same thing that Democrats, Biden and Harris and all of them do. They are smiling while we're lynching from trees. Okay. I say don't trust any of them. Focus on what needs to happen to help your family. It's oftentimes local efforts. So participate in community work. This is what our people have done for centuries. When we formerly could not go to certain schools, we're still segregated. There's a little bit more freedom now, but it's still relative because it's still intentionally designed that way. So focus on supporting and helping each other, and people who become successful, figure out how you can further the success of our people. It doesn't mean perfection, but it means that something has to be done, because when Black folk fail, you can't keep saying, well, it's the Democrats' fault. Trump did it. White House, voting time, stop yelling at Black folks to vote or die. Just like the whole take COVID vaccine or die. Instead of doing that, yelling at Black folk, we've been yelled at for 402 years. Don't do that anymore. Instead, talk about how you can participate, contribute, collaborate, and help each other. We don't need you to yell at us no more. Voting is a freedom, but it does not mean that things are going to improve. So instead, I need people to be more active beyond yelling at Black folk. We're not a dumb people. We don't need you to yell at us. So if you're not going to be consistently present and active, then go on somewhere, you know what I'm saying? But do something other than, and that includes the religious leaders, to get us back to what you said earlier. Religious leaders are experts at yelling at Black folk.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that whole notion that God sent them here to whatever. And most of them are making money. So I always say, if God sent you here for real, why are you making a whole bunch of money surrounded by a whole bunch of poor Black folk? So one of those things.
Yeah, it is one of those things. Yeah, that just touches a nerve. When you're like, baby,
whole bunch of poor Black folk, tithes and offerings, whole bunch of poor Black folk at these mosques. A lot of the cities, these mosques are in very poor Black neighborhoods. And so I just tell people, honesty does not mean that you're ruining the world. Honesty is important to improve the world. Because, a lot of us come from environments where being too honest, you're going to offend somebody. I tell people, if you're offended by honesty, then you're the one who definitely needs honesty.
Oh, wow. Wow. I learned so much today. My
Really?
brain is just...
I'm sorry. I apologize.
No.
I apologize.
You don't need to apologize for my growth. Like that's growth right there. You don't need to apologize for my growth. It's good growth. It's good growth. Dr. Kimya Nuru, thank you so much. Now, if you, the listener, according to her website, want to go beyond ideas to make changes at every level, 365diversity.com is the website for you. 365diversity.com. As always, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and my website, theblacksheepchristian.com. My listeners know this. As always, here we go. As always, please read your Bible. And until next time, later.